So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. We've got people joining us all the time, so I'm just going to pause just for 30 seconds or so, just let a few more people in. Otherwise, we'll keep getting the little box popping up at the top of the screen about who's joining us. So we'll just give it a couple of seconds just before we get going proper, just to let a few people get organized and get themselves added to the webinar. So just give me a second. Thank you. Okay, I think that's the window stopped popping, so that's good news, which means that it's my job to welcome you all. I'm Tim Anderson. I'm the Relationship Director at Energy Saving Trust, and you are very welcome to our webinar. It's the latest in the series, and it's Driving Change, Decarbonising Public Sector Fleets. It's been hugely popular. We've got loads of people that have registered, and so we're thrilled to have you all as well as our speakers. I've been with Energy Saving Trust nearly 20 years, and for most of that time I've been working in the transport decarbonisation field. So this is an area that is particularly close to my heart, and probably some of you who have registered and joined, I've met you at events and various things over the years, so it's really good to have you along. I'm going to just talk quickly about some housekeeping just before we get going. So first of all, you may have noticed that the webinar is being recorded, so that means it will be available apparently on YouTube, which is exciting for all of us budding YouTube stars. So you'll be able to watch us over and over again on YouTube, and you can use that as a resource perhaps for things that inspire you from today. One of the things we'd really urge you to do is put any questions in the Q&A tab that's at the top of the screen, and that will enable our team who are in the background just to collate those questions and make sure they're available to the panel of speakers at the end. So we will be picking those up in a session at the end of the webinar. Likewise, if you would like to speak to us or anyone who's presenting today, please do put your email in the Q&A chat at the top of the screen. That nobody else will see that, only us. So you won't get spammed by everybody else who's on the webinar. But it'd be really great just to have your details, so that if anything resonates with you, anything that's of any interest to you, that anybody says, then we'll be able to follow up, and we'd really love to have a conversation with you afterwards to see if we can support you in your decarbonisation journey. So please do use that. So yeah, recording, Q&A tab, and put your details in if you'd like to speak to us afterwards. So just a quick word on today's agenda, which you can see on the screen now. So we're going to have Laura, who's in my team and works on new business. She's going to be talking about the kind of business case for fleet decarbonisation, followed by a good colleague of ours from up in Scotland, Gordon Manson. Gordon leads our fleet engagement up in Scotland, and so we really felt it'd be really interesting to sort of see what Scottish Government and Energy Saving Trust have been doing together to enable public sector fleets to decarbonise. So that'll be Gordon. And then we're really pleased to have two external speakers join us today as well. Firstly, one of our clients, which is Adrian Hampton from Wiltshire Council, really trailblazing in terms of decarbonisation of fleet through electrification, and he'll be telling a story about the work that we've been doing together in Wiltshire to sort of make that decarbonisation a reality. And then finally, a really good friend of ours and of mine personally, Ryan Bushell from Enterprise Mobility. We've worked with Enterprise for many years, just realising a fantastic partnership together in reaching their customers and them reaching our customers, and it's been a really great partnership. And Enterprise are the biggest provider of rental vehicles and car club to the public sector, so it's really relevant to hear what the supply chain have to say in terms of what's going on. Now, that's the agenda. We do recognise that it's a challenging time at the moment. Some of the political headwinds, the economic headwinds are making it challenging for you as public sector organisations with fleets of vehicles. But the challenge hasn't gone away. Climate change still represents a huge threat to our country and to the world. And we see it as a sort of priority with, there still being a challenge around carbon emissions from transport representing, over a quarter. So that's a really serious issue, and why we keep plugging away after 25 years or so at fleet decarbonisation. It's something that's close to my heart. It's something that's close to our organisation's heart. So that's enough from me. What I'm going to do now is thank you again for coming. I hope you enjoy today. I hope it's informative. Please do get in touch if you'd like any more help. And I'm going to hand over now to one of our experts in new business, which is Laura, and she's going to take over from here and will facilitate the Q&A later on. So Laura, thanks, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tim, and good morning, everybody. I'm Laura Atkinson, Business Development Manager here at Energy Saving Trust, where I also work very closely with our fleet team. And I'm going to talk today, as Tim explained, a little bit about the need and the urgency to decarbonise fleets and how councils can show leadership amongst residents by decarbonising their own vehicles sustainably, as well as thinking about how we can build a business case to do this. Within Energy Saving Trust's fleet consultancy team, we have worked with over 150 local authorities over the last 8 years, supporting them to explore what fleet decarbonisation can look like for their organisation. And that can include mapping out which vehicles are most suitable for replacement for zero emissions alternatives, what charging infrastructure will be needed, as well as indicative vehicle and charging infrastructure costs and investment scenarios to support that planning. And so I'm kind of going to talk a little bit more today kind of about that urgency to kind of make a start now if you haven't already done so. And kind of just to begin with, we'll talk a little bit about the reasons, or just a few of the reasons of why there is this great urgency. So as you can see from this year's Climate Change Committee's carbon budget, transport is still the largest source of emissions in the UK. So it really does still need to be a top priority for decarbonisation in every sector. In local government, fleet decarbonisation can deliver a significant impact. And we've got quite a couple of examples up here on the slide of what this means. But just for one of them, if we think that a diesel refuse collection vehicle can emit over 0.5 tonne of greenhouse gases every week, and we try and do a little bit of maths here, saying perhaps conservatively that each local authority operates about 20 such trucks, this could equate to 3,500 tonnes of emissions every week across the UK. And from this same graph, which I'm sure this will not be a surprise to anybody, we can also see that our electricity supply emissions have followed a dramatic downward trajectory in line with the National Electric System Operator's target 2030 deadline for clean power. So we're seeing transport remaining a stubbornly high contributor to our emissions in the UK, and electricity heading to zero emissions over the next 5 years. And this brings us on nicely to the reason number 2 for why we need to look at our fleet decarbonisation. As our grid continues to decarbonise, clearly the case for electric vehicles becomes ever more compelling. And this is especially so when we think about the opportunities for cost saving with things like smart charging, as we're seeing this the electric vehicle market and the charging infrastructure becoming ever more innovative as our fleet decarbonises. We can also see anybody who has an EV or knows people who have EVs, the market for electric vehicles has advanced and continues to improve year on year. For many different vehicle types, we're seeing those costs going down quite dramatically, and that offers ever more opportunities to decarbonise fleets. I think it might be good just to kind of mention here that obviously we acknowledge there are other alternative fuel sources that can be zero emissions, such as, green hydrogen, that we shouldn't ignore. However, the focus of this presentation and a lot of our current work is of course battery electric. As in the UK, obviously that infrastructure and innovation are most mature for EVs, which usually makes them the most suitable candidate for a business case for meaningful fleet decarbonisation. Importantly, we can see in many cases transitioning to electric vehicles can make financial sense, especially when we look at the whole life costs of those vehicles. So in some cases, the reduction in operating costs over the lifetime of that vehicle can actually make that vehicle, the electric equivalent, cheaper than the ICE vehicle. Or perhaps the difference in cost is not quite as dramatic as we might have thought it was when we look at that whole life cost of the vehicles. However, to do this, we really do need to have a complete and thorough assessment of our existing fleets and look at the scenarios for transitioning that fleet to electric vehicles to support us in making that business case. And only with that can we create a strategy to grow our zero emissions fleet and kind of seize and demonstrate those associated efficiency gains. And then finally, if we don't act now, we can hurt our future environmental commitments. So for an authority, as you can see from this quite straightforward graph here, if you've got a 2030 net zero target and vehicle retention periods of 7 years, any new vehicles being procured, and really any new vehicles that have been procured since 2023, really need to be zero emissions. Any authority not doing that will then risk missing their targets or find themselves forced into a very late, rapid migration with all of the kind of transition hurdles and infrastructure expansion and any accompanying investment that needs to be secured having to happen in the space of a few years, if that is even achievable. So I think we really want to highlight the need that if we haven't started, we really should be starting now. And so I know in a moment we're going to be handing over to Wiltshire Council, who will be talking about their first-hand experience on how they've done this and how they've started their journey and the challenges that they have been facing, as well as we'll be hearing best practice from Ryan. But I just want to cover a few points on kind of how to make a start. And I think here, you know, a lot of the answer lies with the data. We need to make sure that we're using the data to understand our current energy demand from our existing fleet, as well as the peak daily mileage, which can tell us which vehicles are eligible to be swapped out for zero emissions alternatives. And in almost all cases, this is virtually all vehicles, or considerably more than perhaps other people might think there are. But you know, the data will tell us the answer, and it will present those options to us and show what really can be done. So we need to have a really clear picture of how the vehicles are being used to demonstrate that a vehicle is eligible for swapping. Then we need to match the charging infrastructure to the real needs of that zero emissions fleet or those new vehicles. And I think in many cases this could actually be kind of a good news story. We might not need to pop an ultra rapid charger in the ground for each and every vehicle that we have in our fleet. If you've done the assessment, looked at the fleet, looked at the data and seen that you've got vehicles doing less than 100 miles a day and coming back to base overnight, slower overnight charging could be more than enough, and that can save both money and also reduce pressure on the grid. Where power upgrades might still be needed, we obviously need to give ourselves time to secure the investment required and plan for those changes to make sure that we have the capacity to support our kind of electric vehicle ambitions. So it's probably like a bit of a chicken and egg between like the charging infrastructure and the fleet, but really I think looking at the two things together is always crucial. And with this, councils can make a stronger evidence-based case for investment, whether that's for vehicles, chargers, or grid upgrades. So the earlier councils can understand those needs, the better position they are, of course, to act. And when we consider all of these factors together, such as the vehicle usage, the charging infrastructure, and the power required, it becomes quite clear that there is this kind of real urgency to kind of make a start today, look at the data, look at our fleet, look at how we're going to kind of achieve our net zero ambitions and what that will look like to kind of build a strategy. But I think one of the really nice things is that we don't have to do this alone. I think today's webinar is an example of this, where we're going to hear a lot of kind of shared best practice and experiences. And we in Energy Saving Trust have seen how powerful an enabler kind of collaboration can be. And it's so with that, I would really like to hand over to my colleague Gordon, who will talk a little bit more about our work in this area and the impact that that is already having. Just before I do that, can I just remind people, obviously, if you have any questions during today's webinar, please be popping those in the chat and we'll make sure we answer those at the end. So with that, I'll let Gordon take over.
Thanks, Laura, and good morning, everybody. Right, I'll just move on to my slides. Thank you. Great intro. Excellent. As Laura said, and as Tim mentioned at the beginning, my name's Gordon Manson. I'm a programme manager from the transport team up in Scotland. And similarly to Tim, I've been working in this space for a number of years now and seen quite a lot of change in terms of, and great progress being made in terms of the decarbonisation of the public sector. So today, I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the support activity we've been involved in Scotland. And as Laura mentioned, I'm going to focus quite a bit on the collaborative element of our activity and how I think that's been really important in helping to make progress in Scotland. So, okay. First up, so how have we been supporting the Scottish public sector? Well, there's a number of ways that we've been providing support, and similarly to our colleagues down in England, one of the first ones is our bespoke fleet decarbonisation analysis. As Laura was mentioning there, Laura gave a bit of a breakdown of the process to go through in terms of the first steps. And up in Scotland, one of the first things we were asked to do by the Scottish Government, by Transport Scotland, was to offer bespoke fleet analysis for all of the Scottish public sector bodies. So that involved 32 public local authorities and 14 NHS trusts, a number of other public bodies like the national parks and all the extra variety of public sector bodies. And in essence, what we did was we went out and over a number of years, we reached out and collected all of the fleet data we could get our hands on. And as Laura mentioned, that can be one of the most challenging elements, is getting a hold of that data in the first place. But once we've got that data, we then analysed each fleet and made a series of recommendations, initially focused on the car and van fleets, because that was the initial kind of focus for the Scottish Government targets. We had quite challenging or quite stretching targets to decarbonise the public sector car fleets in the 2020s. So that was our initial focus. So we were looking at taking all the fleet data and making key recommendations as to which of the chunks of the fleet could be replaced with zero emission alternatives. In the process, we also did carbon footprinting, which provided a really good sound foundation for those organisations to set the case for where they are at the moment in terms of emissions and what they could achieve if they made various steps in decarbonisation. And then we also, those reports also expanded to look at a more detailed look at depot charging infrastructure as well. So we were collecting data on power supply at depots, half-hourly energy usage to kind of map out the available power at depots that could be used to support. We were making recommendations in terms of the number and type of charge points that could be supported at different depots to give local authorities that key information that allows them to build their strategies going forward. I'll touch on these a little bit later in a slide later on, but yeah, that was the first thing we were doing, is these key kind of fleet decarbonisation support reports. Secondly, one of the things I'm going to focus on a bit this morning is our public sector fleet decarbonisation forum. So this was a kind of innovative idea that ourselves in Transport Scotland came up with to effectively provide a really good platform for the public sector to share information and share best practice, and for us to introduce new solutions from across the sector to the whole stakeholder group in Scotland. And that's been really successful in terms of we've been running it for about 3.5 years, and we've done 25 of these forums now, and they're usually every 2 or 3 months we run a forum with all the public sector fleet managers, and they run for about an hour and a half, similar to this morning's call, in that we have a number of guest speakers, and our focus from the beginning was to invite the public sector fleet managers to come and speak themselves. As one of the primary things was that peer-to-peer learning. So we get them to share what's worked, what hasn't worked, but ultimately just share how they can make progress together, and at the same time they basically bring the knowledge level up across the board in one hit across all the Scottish public sector bodies. So it's been really, really important. I'm going to touch on some of the kind of benefits of that collaborative approach going forward, but yeah, I think it's a really important tool that we've had up in Scotland. We've also been developing our kind of guidance website. And EST is an organisation, if you're not familiar with us, but we've been collecting information and advice for a long time. So we have a lot of really, really powerful advice on our web platforms. But we were funded by the Scottish Government to develop a website targeted on the public sector. So basically a website designed to accumulate all of our learnings in fleet decarbonisation and have it in a reference resource that people can dip into as and when required. So if they want information on depot charging, they can go in and get our best practice advice on the key aspects of thinking about how to develop that. And yeah, that's been quite a useful tool, we think, in terms of providing that reference resource for the public sector. So that's something else we've been working on. We've also been attending industry events, and we've been very fortunate in terms of building that community in Scotland, that we've had invites along to the likes of the Association of Public Sector Excellence APSE event up in Aviemore every year. That happens up in Aviemore up in springtime. And that's been really, really great in terms of getting to know the stakeholder group better, spend a bit of time with our key stakeholders, and help to build that kind of relationship with them. Excuse me. And that's been really, really good. So we've had the opportunity to attend those events, give presentations, deliver workshops, and really, really have a really good approach to developing relationships up there as well. Excuse me, I'll just take a wee drink for a second. And then lastly, in the last wee while, we've been helping to develop our public sector fleet decarbonisation action plan, which is basically a collaboratively developed document that aims to produce a plan that the public sector can sign up to in Scotland to actually progress fleet decarbonisation, and that's been we've been running collaborative workshops with stakeholders to produce that plan over the last few months, and that's been a really important part of our activity. Right, so move on to the next. Okay, so this is the key points I was wanting to kind of touch on today, is that building a collaborative community in Scotland and how that's been really important in making progress. And basically one of the key ways we've been doing this is through our public sector fleet decarbonisation forums, as I mentioned earlier. And as I said, these really give a platform to share best practice and build effectively a community across the stakeholder community. And one of the key things with this is that allowed us to, the stakeholders themselves, the public sector fleet managers, can get to know each other better from one sense, but also they get to know us better, and they get to know the government contacts better as well. And that relationship, I think it's fair to say, I think it's strengthened and has evolved as a result of those forum sessions, which has been really, really important. And I think that's been fundamental in terms of pushing progress forward, because it's all based on those relationships. We're more effective once we get to know people better in the sector, and they get to know us, and there's basically that progress can happen off the back of that. One of the key things we've tried to do is to keep it as informal as possible, and that's basically our style anyway, but I think it makes the stakeholders more comfortable to share their opinions, share input, and that's been a really important part of the approach we've taken, is making people feel comfortable in the forum sessions to come and provide their feedback, provide their input, and that's been really great in terms of the sharing of information. Another thing that's been really a kind of side benefit is that when we're often reaching out to the public sector, looking for information, looking for data, asking them for insights, asking them for feedback, and that's always been more effective, and it's easier to do, as you might imagine, once those relationships have been developed and strengthened through the course of this activity. So that's one really positive side benefit of that kind of collaborative approach that we've had up in Scotland. Another benefit has been the fact that Energy Saving Trust is that we are completely impartial, so we're not trying to sell anything, and that's allowed us, I think we're seen as a trusted partner in Scotland, and that's been really important in developing that kind of community of stakeholders as well. And ultimately, I think, just to kind of sum up in terms of the forum session, I think once you've built that kind of, we've got to know each other, we've got to kind of facilitate the relationship between government and the public sector more effectively. You bring everybody on board with the same mission, and in my experience, everybody is really genuinely on board with what they're trying to achieve in Scotland. There's a series of challenges that are evolving through time, but I think having everybody understanding who the key contacts are, feel comfortable communicating with each other, and all pulling in the same direction is a really powerful approach. So I would really advocate for this kind of a model of bringing stakeholders together. I wanted to quickly also kind of touch back on some of the reports, and in terms of empowering the public sector to make change, I would say that the reports that we provided the public sector are designed in a way in that they are meant to be user-friendly and engaging and easily to access the kind of analysis we're providing. But some of the feedback we've been given is that they're actually used by chopping them into useful chunks. So local authorities like to lift out sections that are useful to them and use them in their internal kind of making the case for change or pitching for funding. So we've designed it so that the kind of useful, kind of engaging charts, graphs, analysis can just be lifted out, and public sector fleet managers are using those to make the case internally. And quite unfortunately, I think sometimes it's better to hear a pitch from an external source or a trusted partner as opposed to internally sometimes within organizations, but we're happy to provide that the external information if that's useful to our partners in the public sector. And that's the feedback we've received, is that we're giving them a tool that they can then use as they see fit to kind of push that change forward. So that's a really positive aspect of the reports we provided people. And just I want to give you a bit of a sense of some of the areas that we're looking at now in Scotland, what we're moving into. As I said at the beginning, we have our public sector fleet decarbonisation action plan, which is something that's in draft at the moment, and it's designed to be a kind of document that clearly spells out the expected actions of the different layers of stakeholders in the public sector community, whether they be the leaders of the local authorities, the fleet managers, and government as well. And it's designed to be a document that everyone can sign up to, and a clear strategy, a kind of plan of attack for how to tackle fleet decarbonisation in the public sector going forward. So that's in draft at the moment, and hopefully that will be released in the near future. And it's been developed in collaboration with the public sector. So it's not been given from government to the public sector. It's been created in collaboration with them. So it should be something that we're hopeful that everybody can sign up to as well. Another area that's really important at the moment is with government funding getting ever more constrained, we're looking at the idea of sharing to make both infrastructure and vehicles more cost effective to fleets. So we've got a project up in Scotland where we're starting to explore the idea of having shared infrastructure, shared charging hubs between multiple public sector bodies. And we're basically in the process of trying to map out a pilot site where we've got a cluster of public sector bodies all in one semi-rural town that could potentially have combined usage of infrastructure that makes it an attractive case for a private sector investor to invest in charging infrastructure. And that ultimately would mean that these public bodies get the benefit of additional charging infrastructure to support their fleet decarbonisation, but a lot of the cost of that might be covered, or the investment cost covered by the private sector, and that makes it easier for the public sector to decarbonise more effectively. So we think that's a really interesting model that could be replicated elsewhere, and we're trying to progress that as a kind of innovative solution going forward. And we're also looking at some of the innovative financial models that are being suggested to help support the public sector to decarbonise. I think we've got some of our public charging activities in Scotland, the likes of our EVIF programme, similar to the Levi programme in England. And it's one of the first projects up in the Highlands is looking at binding in public sector depot charging within the wider rollout of larger public charging infrastructure. So that's kind of inviting private sector finance to help support public sector to decarbonise these large kind of depot sites that are a bit of a challenge in terms of the capital cost of investment. So these are just some of the areas we're looking at just now as well. So just to bring it all together, I think what I wanted to get across today is that one of the key tools to make progress, or what we've seen in Scotland, is developing that community of stakeholders that are all pulling in the same direction. And I think I would highly advocate for online forums, or that kind of model has been a really powerful tool of bringing everyone together regularly and developing those relationships that allows change to happen. As I said at the beginning, keeping it informal is really important. So we want everyone to contribute as much as they can. So ensuring people feel comfortable to voice their opinions, provide their feedback is really, really important as well. And another key aspect that's important is to regularly get an update on the challenges being faced by the public sector community. These challenges are evolving all the time, so it's important for us when we try and annually to touch base and get just an update of what the key challenges are at the coalface, so that we can try and design the solutions and come up with the advice that can genuinely support the public sector to make change. So I think that kind of continual update of what's happening now, what are your primary challenges at this point in time, is really important to focus on as well. And then, as I mentioned before, giving people the tools they need to make change. So I gave the example of our reports that are designed to be kind of chopped up and used as the public sector see fit. I think just giving people, listening to what they need and trying to give them the solutions that help them make the case internally, pitch for additional funding, or just convince senior leadership to make change is really important as well. And then one final thought from me, I think I've just genuinely enjoyed getting to know the public sector in Scotland. They're a really fun community. So I think in the course of building that kind of collaborative community of people all pulling in the same direction, I think it's been genuinely enjoyable to get to know everybody. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, you can work more effectively together once you know each other. And I think, just developing platforms that allow people to kind of build those relationships is really, really important. And that was pretty much everything I wanted to cover today. So thank you very much for your attention. I think I'm going to hand over to Adrian Hampton now from Wiltshire Council. So I'll hand over to Adrian.
That's good because, yeah, that's my name. Hello there, I'm Adrian Hampton. I'm from Wiltshire Council. As you say, I'm preparing for the snow down here, down in Wiltshire with a lovely Stonehenge behind me. Yep, so just a heads up, obviously the Q&A is at the end, so obviously any questions you've got from me. But a bit background on myself, I've been here 35 years at the council. I've been a fleet manager at my time with the CPC, and I must admit, though, in that 35 years, I think this is the most exciting time for fleet. It's a really time you can make a massive difference. So, yeah, exciting time to be part of the fleet world. Yeah, so that is me. So, where are we with Wiltshire Council? So, my bit is to talk to you about, obviously, where Wiltshire Council is in its little journey. So, I'm going to tell you a very familiar story that you'll all be aware of, and it all depends whether this is the tester of whether you're a glass half full or half empty. Whether you see this as a challenge or an opportunity. So back in 2020. We sat there with an outdated fleet. We had no real capital plan. We had allocated some of £500,000, and that was for like 100 RCVs, 240 sort of council operated fleet, and all the ancillary fleet. We had outdated workshops, not fit for purpose. We have outdated depots. We had very little quality data. Of course, then we're looking at the future. We had all this challenge about cost avoidance before we even looked at savings. The council was committed to change, which was really, really good. And at that time, we made a carbon pledge that our Scope 1 carbon would be carbon neutral by 2030. So really challenging, even though it was 10 years, it was really challenging. And probably one of the biggest challenge we had, obviously, the fleet being old and outdated, was the cost of services. So the main cost actually wasn't being suffered by the fleet service, it's being suffered by the services. But a massive opportunity was, even back in 2020, there was lots of good practice out there. We weren't the leaders. There was a lot more going on and a lot more evidence out there. So what happened was the fact that we sat there, we engaged with other authorities, but at that time, the Energy Saving Trust we became aware of the Energy Saving Trust, and so we engaged them and we worked with them. So what happened between 2020 and 2022, we worked with them on a strategy which was to take us from 2023 to 2030. So, and that really, as you would assume with strategy, just brings everything together. It brought all of our pledges to be carbon neutral, the pledges. It looked at the midterm financial strategy, which was challenging, and we are all aware of the challenges going forward with finances, and that challenge has definitely not gone away over the years. We looked at the service plans, and probably a big one in there was also around compliance. So we bought that plan, as we all aware. So the plan was to deliver those commitments, and we brought in what was a void in essence. We first of all started before we looked at anything, avoiding all that wastage. Where are we wasting fleet? And the shift, again, a challenge there. Everybody seemed to like big shiny vehicles, and so where we could go small. So first of all, it was around pool uses, it was around moving to smaller vehicles, and then obviously about electric, and then a big improve the culture with a review. So what happened was we went to, in essence, avoid, shift, improve, and then review, and that's been our mantra ever since. So we had the 2023 review, that was obviously 2023, and we're just actually going through a review at the moment in time with the Energy Saving Trust again for the 2026 review. So that's where we were there. Now, as you would expect, communication plan was vital. We did a whole a whole council review, so it just really wasn't, the outcomes wasn't just really a fleet review, it was a whole council review with services. We had a data and technology plan because, as I said before, the data was very much lacking. So yeah, telematics was definitely an outcome, but our back office systems, and then of course look at those KPIs. And one of the big things we actually had was governance. Back in the day, we allowed managers decide what went on, and one of the things we quickly learned was the fact that a central governance of that was vital. And then a whole philosophy change with policies. You got to rewrite the policies. Education and awareness campaign, and of course, what that all spat out was a vehicle replacement plan. Based upon the life of the vehicles, but again, very much around that hierarchy. So we try to keep it flexible. But the hierarchy was first of all about move whatever we could at that time to electric. What couldn't go to electric, was it suitable for hybrid, or should we be running on HVO? But that was our plan: electric, a little bit of hybrid, but HVO for anything that we couldn't then manage, and then with carbon offsetting being the sort of the final thing. So that gave us a fuel plan, which was really, really vital. And that was a fuel plan for 7 years, a capital plan for 7 years, a revenue plan for 7 years, and obviously the infrastructure plan. So what vehicles were we doing, when? But we had to build in flexibility, and that was really vital from where we've gone, because when we started out, we just didn't think we were going to be converting so many of our vehicles to electric. As you heard, literally, we can take 100% of our vehicles to electric, but it's more around, so I won't say 100, but that's up to about 7.5 tons. But that's more around the, how the business continuity and obviously contingency about how that works, about making sure services can be delivered. I can talk about it a bit more about that in the future. But then what we did do, we adopted the strategy in 2023. So the strategy got adopted in 2023, and it took us obviously to 2030. So, where are we at the moment in time? So in 2025, well, like many of you out there, we are in a different political environment. The Conservatives were in control when we wrote the strategy. We're now a council of no overall control. But that strategy has allowed us to adapt and move forward, and it's still there. It's still our blueprint with regards to our fleet delivery. So we have got capital approval to 2030. Obviously the midterm financial strategy to 2030 shows you what we've got delivered. Yes, there are savings in there, so we've moved from cost avoidance now to savings, but the strategy allows us to do that. What we did do when we started, we took what we call a baseline of vehicles, which was our measure. So we had 240 baseline vehicles, of which through removing wastage, through the data, we've managed to take down to 190 with no impact upon services. Since that time, we've introduced that 240 of those 190 we've got left. 100 of those vehicles are currently electric, with 70 more in order. Of course, they have to be sustainable electric. 60% of the miles we currently travel our sustainable mileage, and actually with regards to vehicles less than 7.5 tons, our high mileage vehicles are actually our electric vehicles. The bigger ones, we've still got a challenge. So we've just ordered our first of the main fleet for minibuses. So we just ordered 10 electric minibuses coming in. We've got one contractor electric RCV. We've got one electric gritter. But the electric vehicle charging points, which is vital for us because this is where we make our savings by having our own electric vehicle charging points. We've got 160 electric vehicle charging points with another 60 coming through. We've had to be inventive with that because we haven't got much money. So that is really about maxing out not just the sites for the depots with regards to electric coming in to avoid those big D&O costs, but it's about using other sites, other available areas, car parks, etc. One, obviously it saves money, but two, obviously it gives us a resilience. So when we lose an area, we've always got local other sort of storage locations we can actually have. We've got vehicle to grid chargers going in. We got them spread over the county, tied with certain vehicles. Obviously, that's tied to the technology within vehicles. What we've also been able to do, which was really quite useful going for 2023, is a phased delivery. So that's really helped us with the infrastructure. That infrastructure can be expensive, but if you phase it in, really makes life a lot easier. And it does mean we're ready for that big bang when it's obviously happening in 2030, 2035. This year, with regards to our budget, we've had to make a saving of £114,000 directly tied to the move to electrification and modern fleets. Our avoid, shift, improve, and we've had to deliver savings, and we have to continue to deliver savings. The governance group is well established now, and that again is a real big challenge to how we're operating our services. So it's not just obviously fleet looking at that. That is, we have a little group from across the county, HR, carbon, obviously fleet, but independent services as well. We've got a new workshop. We've got telematics in all of our vehicles, dash cam, automated systems, and we've obviously got new back office systems as well. But all that's been funded whilst also making savings. And of course, we've got driver behaviour tools, so our telematics in the vehicles actually educate people as they go through. Obviously, in essence, they make noises, they flash, they talk to you, and they tell you, obviously, how you're doing there. So the really important stuff. But probably one of our biggest things is about changing that driver behaviour. Because of range anxiety, etc. Just about when people take breaks, making sure they're taking breaks at electric vehicle charging points, just changing how they travel. And of course, that flexibility means we're still actually running hybrid vehicles. We're still trialing HVO, trialing obviously smaller vehicles, and continue reviewing technology. Technology is changing, as we all know, so much there with regards to particularly vehicles. We all know that when we were buying vehicles originally, our vans were doing 100 miles in a range. Now obviously they're 200 excess, and obviously the cars 400 miles. So there's massive change in technology, massive change in electric vehicle charging points. But likewise, telematics is a way. Again, we're just actually out for our next tender with regards to our telematics. So that's what's going on at the moment in time. But that data, you can't underestimate that need for data and making data-led decisions. And so going forward, what we've actually got, our big part is our driving at work policy. That's continually got to be reviewed and amended with regards to those changes that we bring in. That ties in with the governance. That does sadly tie in with education awareness and I hate to use the word enforcement, but making sure we're actually operating correctly. Vehicle storage has been a real big challenge to us about how we do that, about vehicle storage has a massive impact on how you can avoid wastage, but that's where you walk that careful tightrope between service delivery and vehicle storage, and tied in actually with our new depots. Resilience, everything electric, but what happens if something goes wrong? But also as a council, as I'm sure you're aware, you will all be dealing with this. What happens with our partners? Our partners during obviously fuel shortages, etc. We support them. We provide ways to travel. But what does that look like? How does that resilience look like? How do we ensure that we actually support them? So we've got a resilience plan, in essence, a business contingency plan. What happens is it's not just actually what happens on the day, but how can you plan? How many of it cannot be electric because you just might need something like a hybrid usage instead. And then obviously, but like tying that, if you are hybrid, you're running on an electric, you're not running on fossil fuel, etc. So looking at all of that and resilience actually with the infrastructure itself. But we've still got ambition with regards to where our small vehicles, medium vehicles, we've still got ambition to be 100% electric by 2030, and we're still driving for that, but also considering that resilience impact. I said about how that looks and how that works. We're just at the moment, so we've got that one trial group in. We're actually putting an order in now for electric gritter and 2 smaller gritters. So at that move, that bigger review, and obviously we've got the trial obviously of the base vehicle going through. We've got a big thing now with regards to, I'm sure the councils that do set transport out there. We've had a massive move from the private sector to the council provision with regards to our passenger transport, what those minibuses, a whole new raft of challenges coming in there. And then we're working with the Energy Saving Trust with that. We've also got our housing revenue account, the housing, again, that's a massive growth service within Wiltshire Council, and how we facilitate those, out of hours calls and all those things. And again, we're working with the Energy Saving Trust on delivering that. And I've just mentioned the waste review. So the housing revenue account and the PTU are scope 1, so they fall within our pledge to be carbon neutral by 2030. And our waste review, they are actually scope 3. But again, we've got that water contractors about tying the carbon commitment with scope 3, and scope 3 is endeavour, but we do tie that to account the carbon commitment with scope 1 for them to come forward with ideas about how they can assist the council. And then very quickly, lessons learned. What we've actually have learned is you must have a phase plan. That's what we found out. Data is king. You must know what your vehicles are doing. And you touched on there with infrastructure. Started with thinking we were going to have massive electric vehicle charging points, really whacking the power in. But in reality, we don't. You need a couple of large electric vehicle charging points, but vast majority of ours are 7.2s. Don't underestimate the assumptions. Sadly, so many misconceptions out there with staff. You really have to get them on side. Culture is everything, and that communication plan. But sometimes you just have to move to electric just to make sure that you improve that it works. The governance is key. independent review, get the energy safe trust in, or get somebody else in to actually review what you're doing. That builds confidence. Flexibility in the delivery. We have to be flexible, and that's to maximize the opportunities. And if you promise to make savings or cost avoidance, you have to deliver that if you're into these long-term plans. Only make data-led decisions. We make a decision just based upon the data. There will be lots of myths and legends out there. You have to cut that out. Know your audience when you're trying to sell it. Know the triggers. Know what they want. Say, get external challenging. But one thing I would say that we've learned back in 2020 is the earlier start, the easier it is. So that's what I would say. If you're going to, if you haven't started the journey, start the journey now. And you can never do things soon enough because time quickly escapes me. Okay, and I am now passing on to Ryan.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ryan Bushell, Head of Public Sector for Enterprise Mobility. I have been with Enterprise for nearly 25 years, working specifically in the public sector for the last 16. And I want to first of all thank friends at EST for the opportunity to chat today. And like every Tuesday, I'm going to start with a little bit of 18th century French philosophy. So like Voltaire said, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. Something is better than nothing. So I get that it is hard. There are a lot of challenges out there, or opportunities, depending if you're as positive and glass half full as Adrian. But nevertheless, there are things that are happening, that there is progress to be made, and I'm going to share a little bit about what I see in the marketplace through our business. But just first of all, by way of background and sort of introduction to who Enterprise are, if you don't know much about us, we're lucky enough to have over 1,000 customers within the public sector across a variety of different industries, whether it's local authorities, housing associations, central government and ALBs, education, blue light, charities, you name it. And over that time, we have discovered that we've got a lot more in common, I think, with the public sector than perhaps is immediately obvious. So the first thing that really stands out, particularly relevant, I think, for people on this call, is that, like you, we first and foremost are a fleet operator. So we understand some of the pressures, challenges and opportunities that sit within the fleet sector today that perhaps weren't in existence 5 or 10 years ago. We understand the impact of extended vehicle off-road times and the impact that has to operations. We live and breathe the challenges of rising vehicle acquisition costs, or repair costs, or insurance costs, or the new pressures we have with charging infrastructure. I mean, we never used to have to build petrol stations, but now we're effectively having to do that in our operations and try and deliver that successfully, whilst also navigating the challenge and threading the needle on trying to convince non-company car drivers to use an EV without those quite attractive tax incentives that some people are lucky enough to benefit from. The second similarity that we have in our business relative to the public sector is that our success has been fueled by our local presence. You all have deep connections with your local communities, and so do we. We've got over 460 depots and branches across the country, which have made us really operationally responsive and adaptable. But importantly, those locations are staffed by local people living in the local community, and indeed are many of your residents. So that means that they see and understand some of the challenges the public sector are facing from both sides, as a fleet operator, but also as a resident. So they see the funding challenges and what might be coming down the line in 2 or 3 weeks time, some of the uncertainty that creates economically and politically. We know local government reform is underway, and that also has created some uncertainty within some organisations and the impact that can have on long-term decision making. We experienced the rise in SEND demand and the rising costs of adult and children social care, and some of our people will benefit from the changes in legislation that social landlords are now subject to with AWAB's law. So property needs to be fixed and repaired within much faster timeframes. So we get it. But thankfully, every day we're lucky enough to work with inspiring individuals and organisations that are making progress despite the challenges. And they continue to do more with less and are working towards the targets and, importantly, reduce the environmental impact of their travel. So I'm just going to rattle through a small number of these examples with you today. So the first is HMRC. Perhaps not always the first organisation on your the top of your list when you're thinking about innovation and progression, but they are an organisation that have historically had quite a significant dependency on daily rental, particularly the delivery and collection of vehicles. But about 5 or 6 years ago, they made a transition to to include Car Club as part of their overall suite of options for their corporate mobility. And what that has led to is a shift in some behaviours, not wholesale, but some people are doing more than they once were. And so they save nearly 50% of the total cost of the transaction when they use Car Club. But more importantly, they're saving over a ton of CO2 every month when they walk to the vehicle instead of have the car delivered and collected. Now, please don't get me wrong. I appreciate that is a very modest number, but for a big central government organisation, they are starting to make the shift, and month on month they have more and more users of this service, and iteratively they are making progress. The second example I'll talk about is Jigsaw Housing, a housing association that we're lucky enough to partner with, and they've taken a small number of EV commercial vehicles into their fleet to test and learn how that works within their operations. I think Laura mentioned evidence-based assessment for investment. I wrote that down, and that's exactly what they are doing. They are taking the technology, trying to understand how it works with their operatives, how it works with their residents and the duty cycles, so that they can then make better decisions as and when the data comes in and tells them what to do. National Highways are another relatively progressive organisation that we're working with at the moment. So they have adopted an EV first car rental policy. Now, in reality, probably about 3% of their transactions take place in an EV. So again, low levels, but that's 3% today that wasn't taking place yesterday. And as a consequence of this policy being instituted, they're now exposing more and more drivers to the technology. And if any of you have ever used an EV, it's great. And so they're creating a positive disposition and goodwill towards the technology and are creating advocates. And Adrian, you talked about culture being everything. And that's exactly what National Highways recognise, that they need to create champions to drive faster and more progressive change. So they're starting small, but they've got really big ambitions. DSTL, an organisation actually based in Wiltshire, so local to you, Adrian, but they've got a pool of 100 smart vehicles which they use alongside their daily rental contract, and specifically that model has allowed them to eliminate about 370,000 delivery and collection miles that otherwise would have taken place on Wiltshire's critical road infrastructure. So we're reducing congestion, but they're saving over 100 tonnes of CO2 from the associated delivery and collections that would have been required to enable them to conduct their business travel. Dundee City Council have taken best part of, I think, 25 EV transit customs, again, to create that evidence-based assessment for investment, understanding whether or not the kit which they're carrying, the duty cycles, can have an impact. Also understanding some of the home charging requirements that exist within their operation, that the depot place solutions don't always accommodate. But they're working through those challenges and those opportunities, and the data is really really interesting for them. And then finally, the Shetland Isles Council, slightly different challenge that they were trying to overcome. They wanted to help their residents reduce their dependency on second car ownership. So they wanted to provide a car club to the residents, but the Shetland Islands being what it is, which is an incredibly remote and geographically quite challenging location, there wasn't an economic model that they could build that would make sense for any operator to come in and invest. So they took the quite bold decision to eliminate grey fleet mileage from their business travel hierarchy, so that during the day, all council business takes place in these car club vehicles, and evenings and weekends, the residents have the opportunity to use these for their own personal use. And that's had a really, really positive impact in both reducing their business travel emissions, but also a really positive impact on the wider community. And so the common theme running through all of these examples is that they haven't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Recognizing that decision making can be challenging and sometimes slow within the public sector, they've grasped the nettle, because when it comes to the environment, every second counts. So doing something is better than nothing. And that's the message that we've taken from the customers that we're working with, that don't be afraid to try something, whether or not it's introducing a couple of EVs, whether or not it's an EV first rental policy like National Highways, or just monitoring and measuring grey fleet mileage. Doing something is the first and probably most critical and important step. The second thing that we've learned is that thinking holistically is really beneficial. In the Shetlands example, and many others, sometimes the savings don't instantly match up and make economic sense. So expanding horizons, trying to get a feel of some of the wider organizational benefits and objectives that could be tied into your decision making can sometimes unlock the opportunity that you're trying to create. Whether or not if you're an NHS trust, for instance, the economic argument for changing, moving away from mileage reimbursement might in and of itself not make sense. But if it helps you win the battle in the car park, which means that you can improve your staff retention and improve patient outcomes, then actually suddenly this is probably a conversation that is far more interesting and valuable than just the spreadsheet would suggest. And then the final thing is that in these current times that we find ourselves in, with interesting global events impacting domestic policy making and political environment, with potentially challenging economic times around the corner and maybe uncertain budgets, flexibility is critical. Tying your hands to a solution today that may not even make sense or be relevant to your organization in 3 or 4 years' time is quite a bold decision. And then if you can get the sign off for that long-term decision making, then great. But what we're certainly seeing is that flexibility is even more important today than it ever has been. And the great news is that the market is ready to help. All of you will have a supply chain that you rely on. My strong suggestion and advice would be to test them, pick up the phone and ask them how they can do more for you. And then similarly, the great people at EST can help create the evidence-based decision making that I think we're all interested in hearing today. So that is me. I'd love to hear your questions if you've got any. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ryan. Really interesting presentation. I think that's left a lot of, I think we had a selection of really interesting presentations that's left a lot of food for thought, and we are starting to see some questions coming through in the Q&A chat. If you haven't submitted a question, please feel free to do so. We've still got time to take a few. So I think, Ryan, while you're kind of still on the virtual stage, if we kind of keep you there probably with the first question, if you'd like to answer, but we have, it's Michael Wallace from the Wirral has asked, telematics was mentioned, but do any councils have any software or systems that manage the pooling of vehicles? I don't know if you'd like to, kind of, if you have anything to share there.
Well, I'd like to first of all thank Michael for asking that question, because yeah, absolutely we do. Now, full disclosure, other suppliers will have a solution as well, but I mentioned Car Club. That's effectively the technology that DSTL, for the case that I mentioned, have it in their pool fleet. So it's a bit of tech which talks to a scheduling system, allows you to unlock the car. And if you can think of the approach to these vehicles, very similar to how many organisations now manage meeting rooms within their organisations. If you want to meet a supplier, the first thing you do is you check the meeting room availability, and if it's free, brilliant. If it's not free, you schedule your meeting around the availability of your resources. What you almost certainly don't do is go and book a room in an off-site venue to facilitate that meeting. And pool vehicles, in my view, should be managed exactly the same. You have a finite resource. You allow the technology to make the efficiencies in the asset itself. we see, I mean, depending on your starting point, we see efficiencies ranging from 30 to 60%. In terms of the number of vehicles you could downsize, which to Adrian's earlier point of, first of all, getting rid of the wastage, the technology is a really great way in order to enable that, because you've got the data, can get rid of it and not have an impact at all to your operations. So hopefully, Michael, that answers the question. If you would like to talk about it later, my details are on that QR code. Please let me know.
Super, no, thank you very much, Ryan. And I think while we're kind of talking about software and data, perhaps we could take a question about kind of the types of data that are most useful when building a fleet decarbonisation strategy. I think we've all heard data come up. I think Adrian mentioned telematics. I don't know, Gordon, if you'd like to kind of expand a little more on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've also got Pete Eggman on the call from EST, this is his bread and butter as well, so I might invite Pete to be involved in this. Yeah, from our side of things, as you mentioned, Laura, yourself, I think telematics data is really, really important in terms of one of the most fundamental bits of fleet data that's useful. If you can have that granular data in terms of the actual accurate mileage that each vehicle is doing, the locations it's traveling to, on a weekly, daily, annual basis, then that's a really strong foundation for working out which vehicles are good candidates for zero emission vehicle replacement. Fuel use data is fundamental to our analysis as well, so making sure people collect that data in terms of accurate fuel spend or litres of fuel that are used per vehicle. In essence, data, the more data you've got, the better, and that's what we're trying to encourage people to have good systems in place to collect data, and that's one of our primary bits of advice initially when we start engaging with any organization, is try and have good data systems in place, and also thinking about if we're looking at electric vehicles and looking at depots as well, it's just the data around depot power supply, so engaging with your energy provider, DNO, to get the kind of power supply you have currently into each depot, and it will vary quite a lot. We engage with a lot of organizations. Some people have a lot of spare power at site, and others have minimal, so that might influence your decision making over whether you even stay at an existing depot or whether you actually consider moving depot for future planning purposes. And also the half-hourly energy usage at depot sites is important as well, and that can be easily accessed as well through your energy provider, and that's really useful to map out in detail how much spare power you have on a daily basis, and then you can work out how many low power charge points you can fit into your car park area that can support X number of vehicles to decarbonise. So that's a kind of sense of some of the key data sets that we look for.
Oh, thank you, Gordon. And I don't know, yeah, you're right, Pete, if you're there, if there's anything you'd like to add. Pete is our fleet team manager here at Energy Saving Trust.
I think Gordon summed it up very well there. It's the key things we're looking for telemetry or telematics data, fuel usage data, because from those you can calculate the energy requirement if you switch to battery electric vehicles. And then the other part of it is the locations, the buildings. Where will the vehicles be based? Is there any energy data from the energy supplier, for example, half-hourly data, like Gordon said, because you need to know what capacity there is to charge vehicles at your depot. Don't assume worst case scenarios, because your consumption during the evening and night and very early morning will be minimal usually. And so therefore that's when most recharging of battery electric vehicles takes place. And people tend to assume, there's no capacity here, there's no spare capacity, but it's not always the case. And it's that data that will enable the establishment of how easily battery electric vehicles can be recharged.
Super. Thank you, Pete. We've got another question here from Ian, Mid Suffolk Council, and this is for Adrian. What real world mileage is Wiltshire seeing from EV vans, especially fully loaded in the winter? I don't know if you've got that number kind of to hand, Adrian, or if you can give us a bit of an idea.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's nowhere near what people think they're doing. I think that's the big thing. And then what we actually, the answer is to find out what they are doing first of all. So yeah, it depends. That's why I said some of our vehicles we started off and they had 160, and you're quite right with regards to where they are. It's challenging around about 120 automaking brands, but now because the range extent, none of our vehicles are going anywhere near the range that the vehicles can actually do. So yeah, we can pick on particular vehicles that are limited. One of the things that we did learn Sadly, what we used to do was loads of trials, and people used to pick the vehicles with the shiny wheels and the nicer comfy seats rather than the range. So one of the things that we've actually learned is use the data to select the vehicle rather than actually, sadly, buying the one with the shiny wheels. So at the beginning of the journey, we tried to sell it to services by picking the electric vehicle of their choice, but we quickly learned that does bring range anxiety if they pick a nice shiny vehicle, whereas if you buy it on range on the data, it just goes away. So we've never had a problem of pushing range. It's about making sure your people charge it at night, which can be an issue. Charge it all the time, but data normally tells you we haven't run into a problem with a vehicle range yet. If it's appropriate vehicle, if you buy the wrong vehicle, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Adrian. I think that, some really good guidance there to kind of follow the data in when selecting the vehicles, actually. So we have a question here with Matthew from Harrow, who's saying, we have a very large fleet of minibuses, buses also serving Brent, which are a large proportion of our fleet miles. And the feedback they've had from their fleet team last year was that the market for larger capacity EV minibuses is not well developed. So does anybody in the panel have any insight on the minibus bus EV market? I don't know, Gordon or Pete, if you'd like to jump in here.
Yeah, I think Adrian's probably described the situation pretty well with battery electric minibuses. If you go back a year or two, it was very difficult to find anything that was fairly readily available. Now, a number of the manufacturers, I'm thinking of Peugeot and Ford in particular, but there are others as well, they do produce very realistic battery electric alternatives to diesel minibuses. The other thing as well is if you think about, an adult social care minibus or an SEN minibus, it goes out in the morning, it drops people off, and then in the mid-afternoon, it kind of collects them and takes them back somewhere. You have got that kind of dwell time during the middle of the day when you could be recharging a vehicle, subject to having access to a charge point. And so, there is the scope there to recharge the vehicle if you are testing the limit of the driving range of the vehicle on some of those rounds that you complete. So if you took, say, Harrow and Brent, they're not massive areas, and I don't think they're too hilly. So it is a case of looking at the rounds that your vehicles do and thinking, well, where are there some rounds where we're testing those vehicles to the limit of their driving range? Could they be plugged in during any dwell time during the day, apart from the standard overnight recharge? So I think that answers the question. I hope it does. But that's the kind of thing we would recommend that you look at.
Yeah, so again, kind of also looking at having that picture of how, the mileage vehicles are doing and the journeys that they're doing to see kind of the opportunities as well for swapping out. Keep coming back to that. So thank you, Pete. And Ryan, I see you've got your hand up. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add there.
Yeah, thank you. It was just that so we operate a number of accessible buses, and I would echo everything that Pete has just said, that as a operator and as a purchaser of these vehicles, we're mindful that there is a price premium for the battery at the moment. And so going back to my point that let's not perfect be the enemy of good, what we are seeing lots of customers at the moment who have historically run these buses for a long period of time, rather than do nothing because of that price premium challenge, we're seeing people take vehicles on a shorter cycle now to at least take advantage of the cleaner technology coming in, whilst the price point on some of these the electric vehicles come down. So it's an interim solution as they build towards something which is even better. But doing nothing and just running the vehicles for longer and longer seems to be something that we're starting to see organisations move away from. Iterative improvements.
That's really good. Thank you. And Adrian, is something you'd like to add to?
Yeah, just to reiterate that we've just seen massive reductions actually in minibuses over the last few months, which is why we've just placed the order for 10. we were looking at £250,000 for the sort of the range and the type of minibuses, and now we're looking at 80,000. So just over the last few months, there's been a massive reduction actually in certain size of minibuses, which has meant that we've been able to bring them a lot of flexibility about bringing them into consideration now. So whilst there is a price premium, we also forecast that obviously over the life of the vehicle, it will pay for itself with those new minibuses literally just coming out now. So that's our experience.
And yeah, everybody obviously wants to pitch in. Tim as well, would you like to add something?
Yeah, very, very briefly, Laura. So, yeah, minibuses is always a topic that comes up in fleet decarbonisation seminars and webinars that I've been to. So it is a big topic, particularly for local authorities. And I just wanted to point to some of the work we've been doing up in Scotland around the plugged-in communities grant, which is a grant that Transport Scotland enabled for not just the public sector, but for all community transport type organisations. And we've got some fantastic stories up there. Obviously, with a grant, it means that the cost has been overcome and borne by central government up in Scotland. But nevertheless, we've got some fantastic use cases up in Scotland that we could share with you, both good and bad, actually, about mistakes that have been made, but also where it's working fantastically well in getting quite often vulnerable people to and from where they need to be. So it's a fantastic scheme, but it does require capital investment. And yeah, sorry for elongating that discussion, but I just wanted to add.
No, I think it's great. I think obviously, hopefully that's really helpful for Matthew, for something to go back to his fleet team. So we think the market for EVs is probably a bit better developed than what was reported by the fleet team a year ago, and it's great to see that is the case, and there's first-hand experience of that being the case. Thank you very much. Again, we've got another question from Ian, who's asked, we have many drivers take the van home each night, but some will not have a driveway. So it's kind of coming back to the driveway charging, which is helpful. Useful that this has come up. Has anyone had similar issues, and how did they overcome it? I don't know if Adrian or Ryan, you have any experience to share there.
Sadly, we're having a massive review actually on taking vehicles home, and we spoke just a minute ago about obviously the distance and the range of vehicles. And about where people live and where the work actually is. And so one of the issues, you're quite right to point out, is not just actually taking the vehicle home. Yeah, we're looking at, in Wiltshire, we're looking at channel chargers and, about parking outside vehicles or local car parks that you can actually use. So yes, we have electric vehicle charging points near somebody's home so they can charge up, so they don't leave at home. They look at a local car park as a council. We look at that, but always our own electric vehicle charging points to make the savings. But sadly for ourselves is a bigger fundamental question about, and this is where we have to work very carefully with services around taking a vehicle home or the additional vehicles, that taking a vehicle home, because the data tells us, there are some vehicles that you would question on the side about whether you'd be taking home. So it's all about that data, and sadly that does challenge whether the vehicle should be going home in the first place. Now I know services will. People here might be services thinking, oh my goodness me, what does that mean for my service? But within Wiltshire, that's an honest debate we're actually having, and about where those vehicles should be stored, and maybe going forward they should not be stored at home, but an agreed location that obviously meets both the service need, but also the need to allow us to meet our carbon commitment. So some very difficult conversations that then form part of the driving at work policy, and that's why our driving work policy continues to be reviewed with those outcomes.
Okay, no, thank you very much for sharing that, Adrian. I think that's really, really helpful. I don't know if anybody else has anything they would like to add, or otherwise we'll move on to, I think, probably one final question, if I can, again for you, Adrian. We have a question about how do you present data to senior leadership to gain buy-in for fleet changes? So I think this has been discussed actually a little bit in some of the presentations, but I don't know if there's anything you would like to kind of expand on there. And I think probably with that we can close today's session. Oh, we can't hear you, Adrian. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all about trust and rates and all about that. We talk about robust data, obviously that's king. External review, when we present stuff, we always make sure that we've actually had an external review, whether it's energy saving trust or something else. Good governance, you never want to be made a fool of when you take it to senior leadership team, only taking everyone to granted here, but we have a really robust governance procedure to go up, which is like a fleet board and a performance management group to make sure when it goes up, it's robust and those awkward questions aren't asked. I've spoken again about knowing your audience, about whether what you're trying to achieve is a climate, is it savings, cost avoidance, what sort of scenario modelling have you done? Again, it's vital that the services are in support of actually of that. We've talked about obviously risk avoidance, and again when you're taking out, there's one, as I do, the old argument between capital revenue, where does that sit? What's going on there, and then like always. Particularly with fleet, and it's really quite good now. The vehicle timelines are so much more reduced, but timelines and KPIs. So what we do is make sure we wrap all that together, answering all those questions, and then if we've done that, then obviously that supports any challenge that the senior leadership team, and it gives them confidence that you can deliver.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And kind of, I think, again, we're kind of coming back to, I think, a few kind of underlying themes from this session. Obviously, the importance of the data, the importance of having like a complete fleet assessment, understanding what our vehicles are doing, to see kind of what opportunities there are. I think there are still challenges that need to be overcome. Sometimes there are some difficult conversations that need to happen. And I guess there's not sort of a silver bullet for everything. And I really like also kind of Ryan's, Voltaire's, but we'll give it to Ryan on this occasion. Let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. So that, and I think that's a really, really nice thing to always kind of an important point to always keep in mind. So I think with that, I just want to say thank you very much to all of our speakers. I think that's been a really, really interesting session. I hope that everybody who has connected today has found it interesting also. Thank you so much for staying on for this workshop. Obviously, if you have any additional questions or want to kind of continue this conversation, please drop us an email. We'd be really delighted to talk to you. And I think with that, just so we don't run over, I will say thank you very much once again, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.